Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Scottish Police Authority meeting here at COSLA in Edinburgh. Now, we do have some building works next door to us, so they may get loud. I've been warned that there may be a bit of disturbance, but it should be temporarily for that. I have members' apologies from Angela Leach and Tom Halpin, and Chris Brown here is representing Lynn Brown, the Chief Executive, who also sends her apologies this morning. So it is a requirement of our Code of Conduct that members declare financial or other interests or connections in relation to business for today's meeting. Can members confirm if there are or are not declarations of interest or connections? Grant?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare that I'm a member of the Institute of Advanced Motorists.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And then any other business? I've not been advised of items of any other business. Is there any other business that people want to raise? Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I think this falls to me, actually, to confirm that just a few minutes ago, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs has announced that you, Fiona McQueen, have been appointed as Chair of the Scottish Police Authority for a term of 4 years. I'd just like to say, on the authority's behalf and the authority staff, I'd like to offer my warmest congratulations. From a personal standpoint, I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you, and I know that the CEO, if she were here, would say exactly the same. So, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted and relying on everyone's continuing support and goodwill, and it's a real honour and privilege to have been confirmed in post. Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chair. Many congratulations on behalf of all of the executive, and we look forward to continuing a productive working relationship. Many congratulations.
Thank you very much indeed. That means a lot to me. Thank you. So moving on then to decisions on taking business in private, according to section 20 of our SPA standing orders, can I ask members to confirm their content to take item 10.1 in private, 10.2, the private minute, and item 11, which seeks approval relating to changes to terms and conditions for staff. People content? Thank you very much. So the minute from the 20th of February, subject to any comments, can I invite members to approve the draft minute of the last public authority meeting? Are there any comments or questions on the minute? And then the rolling action log, there's one action proposed to close. Are people content to close the action? Thank you very much. And there's been no decisions taken by correspondence since the last full authority meeting. So that then moves us on to my Chair's report, which I had intended to take it as read and open for questions. But before I open up for questions, and I'm confident the Chief Constable will be talking more about the launch of body-worn video yesterday, but I wanted to mention that I attended the launch in Dundee yesterday, was incredibly impressed, and I'll leave the Chief Constable to talk more about the details, but I'd like to put the authority's thanks on record to the Chief Constable and the senior team. This has not been an easy journey, and it was very heartwarming to see that commitment to public safety, officer safety, been taken through some difficult and challenging times, and it has taken a whole team effort to do that for delivery. So thank you very much for all of that effort, and look forward to seeing the continued benefits of body-worn video in due course. So I'll take any questions that anyone has on my interim chair's report. Pauline?
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to ask a bit more about Section 4, the Community Confidence Action Research Report. Very much welcome this, and wondered if we could elaborate on how the findings will be progressed.
Thank you very much indeed. It was a thoroughly enjoyable report back that I attended, but I'm going to hand over to Chris Brown to give you a bit more detail.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Pauline, for your question. I do have an update from the team, which I think probably answers at least part of that. So insights from the project were fed into the work that's been done on the Local Policing Service Delivery Review, discovery phase, and I believe they have informed the next steps of that review, which will itself bring proposals forward to the Resources Committee later in the year in the form of a full business case. This work has been led by ACC mayors under the direction of DCC Connors. In addition to that, authority staff continue to work with colleagues from Police Scotland and wider partners to further understand public views on the issue of visibility specifically, which feature prominently as a factor affecting people's confidence in the police. The planned research will examine what visibility means to different communities and in different contexts, and what benefits people get out of visibility at the expense of other policing activities. This work will be progressed through the Joint Research and Evidence Forum, GREF, which is co-chaired by board member Tom Halpin and also by DCC Spears as well. And finally, the project team have committed to follow up with 4 communities who participated in the Confidence Project to capture any final reflections and observations following conclusion of the work. Thank you.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed, Chris. If there are no further questions on my report, I'm going to then move through our committee chairs' reports. And as people know, that essentially our committees are the engine rooms of our oversight and where we gain assurance from. Now, Tom Halpin, unfortunately, has had to send his apologies, but Alistair, I understand you are a People Committee member and are able to both answer questions on Tom's behalf, but make any comments you may wish on the last People Committee.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. As you said, I'm deputising here for Tom. I do sit on the People Committee. I'll take the report as read and be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have at this point. Really, it's just to highlight before I do that, that as always, people make any organisation work. And the importance of this committee cannot be overstated. It is always a full agenda and concerns about staff safety, staff well-being, but particularly at this meeting there was a lot of discussion around some of the issues surrounding mental health well-being that were actually drawn out. And the other big area that was drawn out within this meeting, amongst a number of important issues, was that talent pipeline and the creation of it to make sure that at all levels within Police Scotland we have people with the right skills that we can put into the right jobs at the right time. So with that, I'll stop speaking and open up for any questions.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. I understand I have a couple of members who want to ask questions. I'll go to Pauline Howie first.
Very much, Alistair. I very much welcome the intent of the committee to consider evidence of robust forward workforce planning. As you've just mentioned, as you know, being a member of Resources Committee too, it's an area that we've agreed that we need to ensure that we're joined up with People Committee to consider how we can best use the limited resources available to meet the modernisation needs of the service. So many thanks for that update from People Committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Grant, anything from you? Not. Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much indeed. That's lovely. Thanks, Alistair. I'm going to move on to Complaints and Conduct Committee now with Katrina Casper.
Thank you, Chair. The committee took place on the 27th of February and I take my summary report as read. Just to highlight a few things. So the committee, as usual, sought to scrutinise the Police Scotland PSD quarterly performance report in relation to any trends in complaints. And amongst other things, we focused on the rise of complaints in relation to excessive force, and we sought assurance that this was being monitored and fed into operational safety training where necessary. One ongoing area of concern for the committee is the time that it takes Police Scotland to respond to non-criminal complaints, and in particular the volume of historic unallocated non-criminal complaints, which have been referred to as the backlog. We were assured at the committee that although the complaints are unallocated, they have been subject to an initial assessment of threat, risk and harm, and that they were prioritised accordingly, so with immediate action taken where necessary, even though the full investigation of that complaint, which quite often they can be complex, is still pending. Now, later in the agenda, we then considered, we covered Operation Glade, which is the programme of activity that Police Scotland have implemented to enhance their capacity and capability to deal with complaints in a timely and appropriate manner. And this included a substantial uplift in resource in the PSD department specifically for that purpose. Naturally, we sought clarity when the impacts of Operation Glade were going to be reflected in better operational and outcome performance metrics, such as complaint handling times. So we specifically requested data on the backlog volumes to be included into the quarterly performance reports as a separate data set, just to disaggregate that from the overall number of complaints that are continue being received, just so that we've got more transparency around this and more oversight as well. And just to conclude on the conduct side, again, I think we received what I would call a very helpful update on the activity which is underway to prepare for the police ethics conduct and scrutiny bill, just to ensure that Police Scotland are ready for the implementation of this piece of legislation. Happy to answer any questions.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. Chief Constable, were you wanting to respond, or Deputy Spears?
Thanks very much, Chair. Just maybe to reinforce the contribution that we made at the committee, I think modernising the workforce for us is incredibly important, and bringing in civilian investigators to support that, I'm confident that will make some real inroads into the work that we're doing. I think it is important to note that whilst we have a series of complaints to work through, we know what's within that, and we are certainly prioritising complaints in terms of criminality before we get to non-complaints. I think it would be lost on everyone if I didn't highlight, you know, the rollout of body-worn video and complaints, both in terms of handling and reducing the number of complaints, and then supporting the work that PIRT does cannot be understated, and we should start to see the benefits and impact of that pretty much immediately.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. And I think the whole public confidence piece and being able to see something from the complainant's perspective is, of course, important in terms of that ability to respond. So it's helpful and important to see that response from Police Scotland to ensuring that that gets resolved effectively. Thank you. Alistair, back to you with regards to the Commonwealth Games.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We held the first meeting of the Commonwealth Games 2026 Policing Oversight Group on the 3rd of March. With your permission, Chair, we have one ask of the board here. The terms of reference to this oversight group were presented. It was highlighted that the section around risk tolerance, section 1.4, should be updated to be within Police Scotland's risk tolerance rather than as far as possible. Oversight group members and colleagues in Police Scotland agreed with this amendment. The updated terms of reference is appended to this report, and I would request that board members approve this updated version.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, does anyone have any comments or questions for Alistair on the committee? And are we content to approve the amendment to the group's terms of reference? Yes, we are. Thank you very much indeed. Caroline Stewart, Legal Committee.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to take my report as read. I just wanted to add in one bit at the end, which is just to report that we set ourselves a task at the start of this year to triangulate and better improve the financial forecasting and lessons learned elements arising from the work of this committee. And I am pleased to see this work has been undertaken, and while it's still ongoing, we're in such a better shape than we were at the start of this fiscal. So I just wanted to say thank you to the teams at the SPA and Police Scotland for their hard work and endeavour in this mission, and to wish everybody all the best for the future work of the committee. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Caroline. Any comments or questions? No, thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the Policing Together Oversight Group, where Tom would normally have given a brief overview, but in his absence, does anyone have any comments or questions to ask? Because we have other members around the table here. You're here? No? Okay. Katrina?
Well, in the absence of Tom, yes, I'd really like to say that my time on the Policing Together Oversight Group has been incredibly positive. There's some very, very hard work, very positive, proactive work being undertaken in that area. And I said at the last meeting, I'm going to say it here, I'm extremely proud to be involved with Police Scotland, and particularly in this area. Very appreciative.
Thank you, Katrina, and thanks very much indeed for all your contributions in that area. Chief Constable?
Thank you, Chair. Later in the agenda, we've got the paper around joint equality outcomes, and just to give some visibility around the work, which we're really grateful to yourself and Tom and colleagues examining. Importance that we recognise that Policing Together Oversight and Policing Together, the programme is the vehicle for delivery around the joint equality outcomes, and there's a nice coming together of those two key areas of business, and obviously we can explore that when we come to that item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief Constable. And then Grant McCrae, Resources Committee.
I take the report largely as presented. I would like to, however, take this opportunity to commend the work of the finance team under James Gray and his team for the close monitoring of the finances throughout the year. This is not an easy task, and to actually be at almost the 31st of March, so close to actually achieving an absolutely balanced position is not easily achieved, and I would just like to commend the whole team for all the hard work that goes into that. The committee spent quite a bit of time looking at the budget for next year, but that's further on our agenda, so I'll pause any comments on that at this stage.
Thank you very much.
But happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Grant. Any comments or questions on the budget? And again, probably for me to comment on later on in the agenda, but I think delivering such a high-profile pressurised service with a stable budget is so important, and that's the whole team who work to support police service delivery, and I concur with you about the hard work and the skill that has taken to land us where we've landed, and we're very grateful to everyone for doing that. Thank you. So that takes us on to policing and performance for Alistair.
Thanks again, Chair. Like colleagues, I'll take this paper as read, and I will be happy to answer any questions on it. Just a couple of things for me to highlight. One of the things that we did consider was committee effectiveness, which is something that we take extremely seriously. And I felt that the addition of stakeholder comment had real value this year. And just to give that assurance, and I'm sure it's the same for all the committees, that feedback will be valuable. And in workshops coming up next month and the month after, we will make sure we fully take account of any views that were expressed to improve that committee effectiveness. And the second thing for me to highlight is around alignment. The committee feels that there's real progress being made in relation to performance reporting. That thread that runs through, I know it's later in the agenda today, the annual policing plan, the 3-year plan, Vision 2030, and of course the joint strategy on policing. I know that there is still some work ongoing with this, but we're seeing real improvements on that, and it's really supported by the papers that come along in terms of deep dives. At this particular committee, we had a deep dive into rape and sexual crimes. It's concerning, of course, that we see an increase in these things, but to understand what lies behind the figures, getting that deep dive, it really helps. So the committee can oversee the performance, but also offer appropriate support to help on that journey of improvement. So with that, any questions, happy to answer them.
Alistair, thanks very much indeed. Any comments or questions about the work of the committee for Alistair? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I'll move on now to take the Chief Constable's report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. As we move towards 2025-26, I will continue to drive the next phase of reform to implement an effective and sustainable model of policing in Scotland, which delivers safer communities, less crime, supported victims, and a thriving workforce. Key planning, including our annual policing plan and the budget for policing in Scotland, set the parameters for the second year of our business plan to deliver on our vision for policing. Policing in Scotland is an exemplar of public service reform, reducing the annual cost base to the public purse by around £300 million compared to legacy arrangements, while maintaining and improving services and enhancing organisational learning, professionalism and governance. That has been achieved by a workforce that has reduced from over 24,000 to closer to 22,500 people, and through significant challenge and effort. My report outlines the broad and complex police work delivered by those officers, staff and volunteers to deliver great value and improve the lives and well-being of the people and communities of Scotland every day. This ranges from our response to murders, human trafficking, exploitation, securing criminal justice outcomes in relation to serious sexual offending, drug dealing and policing events. I outline work designed to take a more intelligence-driven and technology-enabled approach to tackling retail crime, work with partners to build a society which is more resilient to cyber fraud, and crucial efforts to take a more compassionate approach to communicating with victims of crime, while also continuing to broaden our understanding and engagement with all the communities we serve. All of this is delivered through the dedication, skill and expertise, professionalism and goodwill of police officers, police staff and volunteers who maintain and build the support and cooperation of the public. At the end of February, at my annual Bravery and Excellence Awards, I was able to meet and personally thank officers, staff, volunteers and their families and other members of the public who had played outstanding roles in that whole system mission to build a safer Scotland or to step forward when tragedy or disaster occurs. The nominations were powerful examples of the value policing brings to society, and I also outline a programme of staff recognition during February as part of a broader campaign across UK policing aimed at highlighting the crucial support and expertise non-warranted police staff bring to policing. This week, I thanked Scottish Police Federation and representatives at their conference and listened to their perspectives. The conference was an important opportunity to hear from over 100 officers from across the service, and for me to underline my gratitude for their work to drive the efficiency of Police Scotland and support the welfare of officers. As part of the conference, along with DCC Spears and the Federation Chair David Threadgold, I participated in a question and answer session with delegates. I really value these opportunities to hear about what matters to our frontline colleagues. This was a hugely positive conversation, and I want to thank Federation representatives for their thoughtful questions. The challenge and support of our highly valued statutory and non-statutory staff association plays an important role in improving Police Scotland, and I want to thank the Federation for the invitation and our constructive relationship. I want to thank officers, staff and volunteers for everything they do and recognise the personal commitment they make to what is a vital and fulfilling and very demanding job. We know the demand on policing is increasing and increasingly complex, driven by ongoing pressure on public finances and the cost of living challenges, social issues, emerging technologies and the growth of cyber-enabled crime and new legislation. These pressures can drive vulnerability across society, including in relation to violence against women and girls. From my first day 18 months ago, we've driven efforts to focus on our response to threat, harm and risk, and on problem solving and proactivity, which can prevent crime and help reduce demand. We're taking a proportionate response to crime across Scotland as an appropriate approach to direct measures, including recorded police warnings, so police officers can focus on addressing that threat, harm, risk and vulnerability. And at the same time, we've been working hard to prioritise the front line and collaborating with partners to provide better services in the criminal justice system and in response to mental health incidents while reducing demand on police officers. My report outlines some of what has been achieved through working with NHS 24 and staff at the Contact Command and Control Centre to refer more calls to health colleagues to help people get help from those who are best able to give it, while reducing officer hours spent responding to incidents where they are not needed. I also highlight promising signs that a partnership focus on case management is reducing the number of witnesses, including police officers, who attend court and are not called to give evidence. Yesterday, as has already been referenced, we introduced body-worn video in Tayside area as part of the national rollout to equip more than 10,000 officers and staff with the equipment which will transform policing in Scotland. We know the rollout of mobile devices has a positive impact on safety, well-being, efficiency and public confidence. Body-worn video can help to de-escalate incidents, improve public trust in policing, reduce complaints and support officer and staff safety. It will improve the quality of the evidence presented in court, helping to deliver faster justice for victims and reduce court times for victims, witnesses and police officers. And I particularly want to thank CDIO Andrew Hendry, the change team and the staff at Tayside Division for delivering and embracing this really important technology. And I can report that in the first 24 hours, we have uploaded almost 200 pieces of evidence, and we now have trained in the region of 250 to 300 officers who are now trained and equipped in Tayside with body-worn video. I'm confident that we're making progress on the next phase of reform, and I recognise policing must continue to drive and capture efficiencies to make conscious decisions to reinvest to deliver a sustainable and effective policing model. Positive change must be felt by the front line and the communities that we serve. Continuous reform and efficiency must be the new normal in public service, and we remain committed to delivering best value. Reform achieved should be rewarded, and I do believe this has been recognised in our funding allocation. Our budget remains challenging, with a built-in savings requirement and anticipated pay pressures. However, Scottish Government funding allows us to continue officer recruitment for a full-time officer establishment of around 16,500 police officers, while modernising the workforce to release experienced officers from roles which don't need warranted powers, so that we can prioritise, maximise and support the front line to deliver for our communities. Our allocation enables policing to progress on the delivery of our business plan, and key plans for 25-26 include the development of a strengthened community policing model to provide identifiable officers to local areas, and the establishment of a new cyber fraud unit to tackle online crime and better support victims. Ensuring Scotland continues to be a safe place to live and work is my commitment and priority. As Chief Constable, my view is that the route to a safer Scotland is through the next phase of policing reform. Before I stop for questions, I want to place on record a joint statement between myself and the family of Sheku Bayou this week. I've met with the family of Sheku and expressed my condolences and underlined my ongoing commitment to fully engage in the public inquiry. We've agreed a settlement with the family of Sheku without any admission of liability by Police Scotland. To protect the privacy of his family, details of the agreement will remain confidential, and neither party will make any further comment on this matter. Thank you, Chair, and I'll open up for questions.
Chief Constable, thank you very much for that full report. I'm now going to hand over to members who've indicated they wish to ask a question, and I'm going to start with Chris Cregan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, as ever, for your report. I have got questions in a couple of areas, both the Mental Health Task Force and criminal justice effectiveness. And if I could start with the Mental Health Task Force, and really welcome progress that's being made in this area, tangible progress that is now being made in this area, and a very practical and meaningful contribution that's making to the kind of wider public service reform agenda from a policing perspective. I wondered if you'd like to say more about the impact of the mental health pathway, and in a sense, what do we know about the nature of apologies, what do we know about the nature of the referrals? We've got some quantity there. What do we know about the nature of the referrals and what that's telling us about the impact of the mental health pathway? And in terms of the mental health index, you've talked there in your report about positive feedback from officers in terms of around the benefits to individuals. What do we know, if anything, from individuals themselves, from service users themselves, in terms of the impact and the benefits? Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. I'll make a few additional comments, and then DC Spears will go into some of the detail that you've referenced there. Obviously, the pathway and the index are two elements of a broader piece of reform led by the task force. This is an area of business for Police Scotland that I think we are starting to create some real momentum around, but is probably one of the more challenging areas in terms of police officers actually feeling the impact. So we'll reference hundreds of this and thousands of hours, but thousands of hours saved, but when you reflect in terms of the scale of this piece of business and the actual feeling of impact by an individual officer on an individual team across the whole of the country, we have some way to go. But there are some positive green shoots, and I think one of our priorities for this year is greater engagement or doubling down on the engagement with partners to try and replicate what we've seen in Lanarkshire. But I'll pass over to DCC Spears. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And just to build on the Chief Constable's comments, if we firstly could think about the pathway, and when we first introduced the pathway, and in the months that followed, we've seen somewhere in the region of maybe about 150 to 170 incidents per month where we were deferring them into other health services. If we look at where we are right now, that's in excess of 400 incidents per month. I think the gravity of those incidents cannot be lost. In effect, every incident that we defer to another service and prevent officers having to attend those incidents, it's about half a shift. So those officers are tied up to an incident. So in this calendar year, we've seen about 1,000 incidents already this year, where we've not had to send officers, and that's that's half a shift 1,000 times over that those officers are not engaged. So in some way, that for me, that's incredibly positive. And secondly, it also means that the individual who needs some support is getting the right sort of service. When we think about the mental health index, what that is designed to do is reduce the amount of time that officers may be engaged with vulnerable people within the communities. They have on their PDA 24/7 access to clinicians. Those clinicians can speak to and direct the officers, but they can also speak directly to the individual. So I think we are seeing quite remarkable progress. But to the Chief's point, when we look at the demand right across the country, we have a distance to go, and we are relying on continued support from partners. But there is real progress. There is momentum being built, and I think we'll continue to build on that through the forums and the partnership collaboration groups that we've got in place.
Thank you. Thanks very much for those responses. I think we absolutely recognise the challenge that working in this area and partnership in this area represents. I know from my own previous involvement in the mental health sector just how challenging this is. So really welcome your candour about that challenge, as well as the progress that's being made. Thank you. My other question, Chair, if I might, is around the section of your report, Chief Constable, on criminal justice efficiencies. And again, really welcome progress in this area and Police Scotland's focus on its own contribution. I guess I was keen to tease out how far we were able to measure the benefits to the public in terms of increased officer time in communities, whether that be through visibility, partnership, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. So I referenced in my report the progress around summary case management, which is one of the big drivers for us as an organisation and for the criminal justice system in terms of efficiency. And primary objective is for us to play our part in reducing the number of times victims have to go to court, and that has the very positive knock-on effect on police officers. So what we're seeing is very positive signs at Tayside and across in some of the thematic courts in Glasgow. There is now an agreement by all the sheriff principals across the country that they will all adopt summary case management. That doesn't come without its demands on Police Scotland, but on balance, us investing more time in ensuring that when our evidence is presented at the first hearing, it is complete, and body-worn helps us with that, then that is a good investment in terms of, upstream, and then we need judiciary and those who represent defendants to do their part in terms of driving the business of the court on. So summary case management is just one theme, and it's complemented by desk and by body-worn video and by good judicial leadership. To your specific question about what impact does this have on victims, I don't. I'm going to look at my colleagues. I don't have any data on that, but actually we'll take that away and have a look, and it's a really good point. We've got become very focused on the impact, but we'll be able to see the impact in terms of on victims. DCC Smith might be able to add something more there.
Thanks, Chief Constable. Just a couple of bits, if I may, around that. So I think the point that you raise is a really important one in terms of capturing those benefits, not least in demand reduction for the officers on the front line, and then what we do with their time in terms of if they're not at court being cited, how are we using them in the front line? And then the additionality in that is in terms of victims. So when victims are not cited to court, what's the benefit of that in terms of the communities, the trust in the criminal justice system, etc. So I, as taking on the transformation portfolio, it's something that I'm really keen that we capture in a different way. So at the moment, and it's in its early stages, we're putting together a high-level plan which pulls together all of the transformation work and brings in demand reduction, capacity gain, so that we can show and talk about that narrative in terms of, well, what does that mean for our officers and staff on the front line, and what does that mean for the public in terms of benefits? I think we've traditionally looked at that around savings and cost, and actually for me it's more about the experience, the time, how does it feel, etc. So we're not there yet, it's a work in progress, but it's something that I'm really keen that we pull together, and I'll bring that through the Resources Committee in June so that the committee can have a look at in terms of that longer piece of work, and then as we develop that further we'll be able to use some of those metrics to discuss some of those things with you, so hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. And I guess what lies behind both of my questions in terms of mental health and criminal justice is the drive that we need to have, and I know you recognise this, to really be able to measure and understand the impact of work that we're doing in this area, because that in itself will drive increased efficiency and more effective partnership. So thank you very much.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed for that. And I think the importance of keeping the centre on those who use our service, the public, and making sure that there's a focus there, and in particular victims. I know that the Chief Constable, you've talked about the experience that victims have, and a wide range of part of the criminal justice system, but here where policing can actually make improvements, that is helpful, and welcome DCC Smith's commitment to having a closer look at that and reporting back through the committee structure. Thank you. I'm going to go to Grant now.
Thank you, Chair. And I've got two questions. First of all, thank you very much, Chief Constable, for your report. As a member of the Institute of Advanced Motorists, I very much welcome the motorcycle safety campaign. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the rider refinement course, the expected cost, and how the impact and effectiveness will be monitored and in due course reported to the SPA. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to let DCC Scott Connors take this response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question and the opportunity to talk about something that's very positive in terms of changing and adapting rider behaviour and making sure that people remain safe on our roads. We know that Scotland in particular has beautiful scenery. People love to come here, they love to ride on the roads. So this particular scheme, the Rider Refinement Scheme, is being rolled out across the country this summer. It's a course, it costs about £40, it takes about 10, 11 people on it. It has motorcycle riders from Police Scotland as well as Institute Advanced Motorists. And what they do is they will look at different behaviours with the riders, correct them, help them to be safer on the roads. They also do bike checks and look at the safety checks of the actual bike that they're riding. So it's not just riding behaviour, but it's the wider safety around the bikes as well. It has already had some evaluation, which is why it's now rolling out from the north to across the whole of the country. And the positive feedback that has been had from the riders on it is, one, they enjoy riding more because they feel safer and their behaviour on the bikes they feel is much better. And I think just by highlighting it here will also have the impact of people who are in cars or around riders to think about the bikes, to think about that. It's not just one side of the behaviour, it's about everybody. So thank you very much for your question. There's also lots of support from local authorities and lots of different Transport Scotland, so it's a real partnership approach. But we're hoping that more people will hear about it, enrol in it as it goes across the country. But overall, really, really positive, and our thanks to everybody involved.
Have you any thoughts on rolling that out to perhaps motorists who are not perhaps behaving as well as people might expect them to do when they're driving on the roads?
So I think there's two parts to that. There's a number of actual charities, especially with younger drivers. There are charities who get involved with younger drivers, and again through Transport Scotland and other mechanisms to increase their awareness of roads. Being able to have things like speed awareness courses, we've talked about it, those behaviour changes during enforcement. So there are many voluntary courses that people can do if they want to bring their driving back up to scratch, but there are also kind of more around the enforcement that we've talked about here previously, and is definitely work in progress about that behaviour change that's required, particularly around speed awareness and the road conditions. So there are opportunities to roll it out. But I think our focus, rather than just enforcement, but on behaviour change through courses, would be valuable as well.
Thank you, that's very positive. Could I go on to the second question? And this is related to the Chief Constable in relation to your comments about the reduced workforce. This obviously, with a reduced workforce, it really derives the importance of effective management training for all those coming up through the ranks. And I wonder if you could say anything about the plans to give management training in areas such as finance and HR as people are coming up through the ranks before they are expected to take on responsibility for managing these in an area that they might not be terribly experienced to date.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. So the board will be familiar with the programme around Your Leadership Matters, and that was very much focused around values-based leadership and behaviours. And as we move forward, and DCC Spears will add some more detail in relation to this, we absolutely recognise the point you've made there in terms of, I suppose I call them the sort of technical skills around leading a team of either officers or staff, and the programme we're going to describe is for both. And whether that's in relation to, absence management, well-being, leadership, those technical skills, performance management, those technical skills that are required over and above the values and the behaviours. So I'll pass over now with the detail around the progress we've made.
Thank you, Grant, for the question. So we have a people development management programme, and we've rolled out phase one of that programme. Phase one focuses on our first line managers, whether you're a police officer, police sergeant or a member of staff. And we have plans over the course of the incoming financial year to roll out phase two, which will focus on the inspecting rank, and then phase three, which will focus on the superintending rank. So the thrust of the programme is about people management. It's about creating the environment around a positive workplace. And the two-day training programme is all about capability, attendance management, grievance, health and well-being of our staff. So in that phase one, we're targeting our sort of 3,000 first-line managers. We're so far almost halfway through the delivery of that programme. It has been incredibly well evaluated. What I would say, it's not a single panacea. If we look at how we train our sergeants now, they partake in a 1-year probationary sergeants programme, so there are other elements to that. So I don't see this programme being an isolated programme where it's our only point of delivery. But we're recognising that quite often the challenge of a first-line manager maybe not always be about operational policing and delivering within the community, but how do you build a team that you can get the best out of your team? So this supports hugely our vision around a thriving workforce. So we're taking the lessons evaluation from phase 1, as I say, and look to roll out phase 2 and then phase 3 over the course of the next year.
It's very encouraging. I certainly, from what I've seen right through my career, giving the right training at the right time is very cost effective and very important in getting the best out of people. Thank you.
Chair, can I?
Of course.
Chair, just before we finish on that item, what will be interesting for us to see when we do the survey later this year is that the feedback around team and team identity and leadership by first and second line managers was really, really positive. So people were very complimentary and supportive of those sergeants, inspectors and our police staff equivalent. But it will be interesting to see whether we can build on that even further through these programmes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and good to know that there are ways in place that we'll be monitoring and measuring, as well as the immediate feedback, which, as DCC Spirit says, is positive and helpful. But seeing that progress over time will be highly effective. I'm now going to pass back to Alistair Hay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. I've got a comment and then 2 questions. My comment really is just to say that I really appreciate the recognition for staff that you highlight throughout your report. There's clearly 2 specific areas there, so congratulations to recipients at the Bravery and Excellence Awards, and then you also highlight the importance of police staff, non-warranted members of Police Scotland, and that week of celebration that was there. My first question is in relation to policing of the Celtic versus Rangers match, which you comment on in your report. Following that match, I've picked up that there's been quite a lot of commentary around the policing approach to that. I wonder if you wanted to expand upon that.
Thank you. Jane was actually with the officers who police that event on the Sunday, so I'll ask her to pick that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for the question. I think the first thing I would say is that public safety is always going to be our priority, and making sure that we can identify anybody that's intent on disruption. It was actually 58,000 fans who went to that game, and the absolute vast majority really enjoyed it, and behaviour was impeccable. So I just wanted to kind of make that so it doesn't overshadow the kind of vast majority. I think we were very clear at the beginning that we'd seen disorder in December. We wanted to make sure that we were aware of what was going on. A Section 60, which is an intelligence-led power and has thresholds with it in terms of when you expect to see serious violence or weapons carried, that was actually put into place before the game. It was really well publicised. There was a lot of media coverage of it. So for me, in terms of proportionality, understanding public safety and managing anybody intent on disruption, I think the way that it was media publicised and made sure that people knew about it, people were very clear what our parameters were around that. We then saw a couple of groups who started together, didn't want to get searched and actually caused issues with the police. One group in particular, there was lots of engagement, lots of talking, and actually that group were searched and then escorted it up to the ground, and that group was about 100 strong. Half that group didn't actually have tickets, so we do see that people gather when they don't actually have tickets for the game. The second group, same thing again, started together, masked up, intelligence saying that they were carrying items that they shouldn't have and that would cause danger to the public. And again, you know, that group were engaged with, The powers were explained, exhaustively. There were plenty of opportunities with warnings that they needed to be searched, they needed to remove the face coverings. The group just chose not to do that. They also sort of set a fire in the middle of it to get rid of some of the evidence that they had. And it was that group that was then not allowed to progress. So despite engagement, despite explanations, despite trying to, say to this group, these are the powers that we have, that group in particular were not able to progress up to the ground. So overall, I do believe it was proportionate. I understand that some of the groups feel it wasn't, but the time that was spent on engagement with that particular group, and we didn't see that from the other groups. So overall, again, I'd like to say thank you to the 58,000 fans, really tiny minority, an excellent job by the command team in terms of balancing public safety and what was proportionate action on the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Absolutely, the overwhelming majority of football fans just want to enjoy the day and hope their team does well. And as you conclude your report, in this section of your report, by saying the sporting event is a real focus, and that's what you're trying to facilitate. So thank you for that. If I can move on to my second question, Chair.
You may, Alistair, but I'm just checking. Paul had indicated he'd wanted to come in. Is it on this matter or something else? Something else? No, Grant. Yes, please, Alistair.
Thanks. Thinking about supporting the front line and the ongoing work with the Biometrics Commission on the SP in relation to live facial recognition, I just wondered where we were in terms of progressing that and the preparedness of Police Scotland if we go live with this.
Thank you. And as you're aware, this is a joint. I was going to say a joint endeavour. It involves yourselves, ourselves, as you say, Biometrics Commissioner. I'll ask DCC Smith to provide the update.
Thanks, Chief Constable. Thanks for the question. Just in relation to that, so to give you a bit of an update, we've completed the work to identify the use cases, which I think is a really important piece of work, and to understand how live facial recognition might benefit the people of Scotland. We're finalising a draft, and I'm really grateful for the support of SPA officials within that as well. And that evidence report will be taken forward through our various committees for a discussion. The plan will be then that in April, between ourselves and the police authority, we will engage several interested parties in to discuss the paper and have that conversation. There's a broad range of individuals that we think it would be really helpful to invite to that, to have a discussion, to draw out different opinions and views in relation to that. And we will also, in April, share publicly some sort of public polling that we're going to do, an engagement to seek views ahead of formal consultation around the potential use of live facial recognition. In mid-May, we are going to host a national conversation, which will be chaired by an independent individual, probably from academia, who has lots of interest and understanding in this particular area. And within that, we will have different views and opinions around the table to have a really productive conversation around this particular technology, and probably, I hope, draw out some other thoughts and views around different technology as well in a broader sense that we know that people are interested in. Once we've done that, we will present all of that back to the Police and Performance Committee in June with proposals around a summary of the discussions that we've had, views, thoughts, and also, I think, benchmarking from the rest of the UK in terms of use for live facial recognition. That will be brought back to the committee in June for a further discussion and a view on options in terms of what we do moving forward.
Yeah, thanks very much for that update. Very robust and inclusive approach that you're taking. You can see potential benefits, but there are questions to be asked, and we look forward to receiving your report at the June PPC meeting.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. And I know, Chief Constable, I've heard you say that the use of artificial intelligence in other fields such as medicine or keeping children safe is important, and therefore navigating our way through this is going to be incredibly important to both recognise human rights, but also how we make further steps into keeping society safe. So look forward to seeing that work progress. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Pauline.
Constable, thanks very much for your very informative report and indeed to the work of the whole team in terms of pursuing your strategic outcomes. I wonder if you could say a bit more about the retail crime task force and strategy and the outcomes being pursued and when retailers and the public might see improvements. Thank you.
Thank you. So colleagues will be aware that we received an additional £3 million to focus on this area, which is clearly important both to retailers and also to the broader public. What I would say before I go into the detail in relation to shoplifting, if you look at our performance in relation to other areas of acquisitive crime, so I'm thinking about housebreaking and vehicle crime, our performance and our record, and this has been seen by the Performance Committee, is really strong. So we're seeing declines, reductions in those offences. But conversely, around retail crime, we have seen an increase over recent times, and you will have seen significant publicity in relation to this, both across Scotland and more broadly. And we could probably have a lengthy debate about what are the drivers in relation to this. But you know, it's not a leap to say some of this is around cost of living and you know, survival, but some of it is clearly very, very well organised, and it is very, very lucrative. And we see groups, gangs, and that organisation both across Scotland and across the United Kingdom. So this is going to be a partnership approach. We've been working closely with the Scottish Partnership Against Acquisitive Retail Crime, and we've developed with them a task force that has resource allocated to it, both officers, staff, a focus around intelligence, a focus around prevention, a focus around analysis, because we have a lot of intelligence sources and we need to use them well. There's a 4 Ps approach, very, very policey, but not unsurprising. There's a strong prevention element to it, and with the partners around community justice, we're looking at a diversion programme, and also with a focus around safeguarding. Because there's a recent example where what we're seeing is, you know, I'm going to say a sort of Fagin type arrangement, and that's not to underplay the impact, but an individual who is mobilising young people in an organised way to steal from shops on a macro scale. So we need to have that focus around young people and the impact. There's a pursue element, so this is, you know, that targeting of organised criminality, looking at repeat locations, looking at what the intelligence is saying about where we best focus our attention. And we're part of a broader UK-wide policing endeavour called Operation Opal. And we support that and have the advantage of being able to look across the United Kingdom, and we know gangs are travelling all across the UK. Within Protect arm of those 4 Ps, we're looking at greater use of civil orders and town centre partnerships and a greater exchange of information, and then the technology, importantly. So this is both the efficiency and the effectiveness piece. How do we get these reports in a timely, efficient way, and use of technology to do that? And then a focus in relation to greater warning and informing of networks of retailers, so that we try and at least get ahead of some of these issues, because people will go, they will focus on a location, and they will operate for a number of hours, and then they'll move somewhere else. So they're the elements. I mean, key indicators, clearly we want to see a reduction in retail crime, but also to the performance, and the Performance Committee have seen this. while the number of incidents and crimes has been rising, what we have seen is a very strong detection figure around retail crime, 48%. Why is that important? So what I'm saying is that we've maintained that high detection figure even though the number of crimes has gone up. So in terms of, from a productivity point of view, you know, there's a lot of work and a lot of focus in relation to it, but we just need to get an impact on the volume, the repeat nature of it, the organised crime, and try and get it upstream of some of the issues, especially where young people are being enticed into this. Thank you.
Satisfied with that? Yes, thank you very much indeed. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just returning to the mental health pathways, my rudimentary calculations, that 41,900 hours is roughly equivalent to about 25 police officers, you know, full-time equivalents, approximately. So that's quite, it's not an enormous saving, but it's not negligible, to put it mildly. So that's, you know, that's what we're doing already on that. So I'm curious about how much more this task force will be able to do once it's really firing. I'm also interested to find out what the level of membership of the task force is. Is it senior enough in terms of decision making in the other bodies that are involved? So maybe, Alan, if you could expand on that a little, I'd be really grateful.
Thank you, and I think we've always said that progression in this space is utterly reliant on a range of different partners and providers. I think when you go locally, you see brilliant engagement with third sector organisations, and there's lots of really positive work being done in local areas. I think there is a fairly robust approach. That is on. I'll bring it closer. I think there's some really robust governance in place. So government sit over the top of the work that we're doing. So there is a strategic forum that Police Scotland, SPA colleagues, and also different parts of health service would sit within. I think we drive progress around the task force, and we've got a key range of partners in the room. And I think also important to have partners in the room who are demonstrating some really good practice. We've also got a delivery group, which has been chaired by some of the colleagues within SPA, that brings some of the key agencies round the table. So I think there is potential, but I think when we see real progress, I would want to hear that from our officers. And I'll go back to the early comments that the Chief made. I don't think day-to-day officers are naturally, you know, saying I can see a massive difference. I'm also quite reserved in terms of how we start to quantify those hours. And, you know, I can talk about the hours, but I know the time that an officer would spend on any particular incident is significant. So, you know, that half your shift is dealing with one mental health crisis, potentially. And that can be from engagement with the individual to sitting at the hospital. So that is not lost on us. I think when we started this, we talked about 500 to 600 officers full time was the national impact of this. So whilst, you know, 25, 30 officers as a calculation isn't insignificant, we've got more work to do. Do I think there's a willingness with other partners? I think there absolutely is. Do I think we have got challenges geographically, working with a range of different health boards, and how do we try and take a great practice from Hamilton or Perth and see that roll out across the country? That brings a challenge which we on our own can't resolve. So I think the governance around this, we have the task force, we have an oversight group which I chair, we have a feed into the delivery group, and then we're feeding into the government, demonstrates that there is a real commitment behind the work that we're doing.
To be welcomed, and I get that this is a layered approach to a massively complicated problem. I've always said that to address issues like this, good partnership working is about being greater than the sum of the parts, and it sounds like that's what's happening here. The seniority, are you getting people, particularly from other public sector agencies, that are of sufficient seniority in order to make decisions? Because sometimes in the past, I've found at local level, certainly, that's not always been the case.
I think in short we are. I think what good would look like for me is that we're probably leading a little bit less of that work. So right now, you know, we're the key agency at the strategic group chaired by the government. SPA colleagues chair the delivery group, and you know, we work really closely there. Probably, you know, I would like to see other partners stepping forward, and whilst we'll play a critical part in this, I would like us not to be leading on as much as we currently are. But we're seeing more and more positive engagement by senior leaders in other sectors.
Thank you very much, and that's helpful. I think, you know, across the Chief Constable's report, the conversation about centring the services on the most vulnerable in society, and it's, I think, reassuring to see that proof of concept in terms of what's happening in Lanarkshire with people who are in severe mental health crisis, and so not forgetting the people at the centre of this, but also whilst we are working strategically and in partnership with other agencies, because there are other interventions that can perhaps be more effective than a police officer. Nonetheless, we are incredibly grateful for the work that our police officers do to support people who are at their vulnerable age. So thank you for that indeed. I'm now going to hand over to our Deputy Chief Exec on behalf of Lynn Brown to present her report.
Thank you, Chair. Members will have read the report from the Chief Executive, but there are just one or two points I'd like to pull out, if I may. So I'd like to start with just recognising our departing board members, Katrina, Caroline and Grant. I know the Chief Executive was very keen that I expressed her thanks and those of her entire team for everything you've done over the last few years, your wise counsel, your tenacity, your investment in policing, and sincerely thank you very much indeed. And I think we'd all like to wish you the very best in all of your future endeavours. So thank you. And we'll have a chance to say goodbye properly a bit later on, I believe. On CEO recruitment, Lynn Brown, the Chief Executive, has previously indicated to the board her intention to retire by the end of September this year. The recruitment process to appoint her successor will be launching on the 7th of April with a closing date of the 9th of May, and it's hoped that an appointment can be made and a successor in place prior to Lynn's departure. Next, the third and final annual delivery plan supporting the authority's 2023 to 26 corporate strategy has now been finalised. This represents the wide range of activities and milestones that support delivery of that strategy, and this will be surfaced at and tracked through the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee in due course. I'd like to thank all authority staff for contributing to this plan, especially Amanda Coulthard, Head of Strategy and Performance, for leading this on our behalf, and also all the input from board members as well. Finally, a few comments on the review of sex and gender. Members will be aware that Police Scotland committed to a comprehensive review of policy and practice regarding sex and gender back in September of last year. As per the CEO's report, Police Scotland have since confirmed that the scope of this review goes beyond just the recording of data. I think that point is particularly relevant given the evolving public discourse on, for example, single-sex spaces. Interventions by the AHRC, both in relation to the For Women Scotland Supreme Court appeal and their letter to the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, underscore the importance and also the complexity of this issue. It is on that basis that since this report was published, the CEO has now written to the AHRC seeking clarity and further guidance on guidance on key equality-related policy issues, particularly where there may be a conflict, a perceived conflict, or misalignment between protected characteristics. I think we can agree that public bodies have faced significant challenges in navigating these issues. We and others would benefit enormously from clear guidance on our application of, in particular, the Equalities Act and the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations 1992. Thank you. Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed, Chris, for that. Any comments or questions, Katerina?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Chris, for the update. Really appreciate that. I suppose an observation and possibly a question or an ask. So absolutely, I think, and I am a member of the PPC, so we do receive regular updates on the progress of this important review and fully appreciate that it has got a wide scope, and I think the process that sits behind that in terms of consultation seems to be robust, so that is to be welcome. And like all good things, this naturally takes some time. What I would say, though, however, and I think this is recognised in your update, Chris, that we are now in an entirely different environment than we were even in September. And that is primarily in relation to a number of tribunals, some of which have concluded, some of which are still ongoing. And although the single-sex space is the one that has absolutely captured sort of the public discussion, there's also been some cases around constructive dismissal where people have been found to be constructively dismissed by the policies of public sector bodies that were found to be too one-sided in in whatever ideology I suppose they were aligned with, or how they have interpreted the Equality Act and the legislation. So it's a really complex legal environment, and I think the role of the EHRC, the fact that we've written, I think is to be welcome. But I also think, we started off talking about data, and we started talking about the risks of data capture. And I'm sure, again, that members are aware that the Professor Alice Sullivan review into data capture was published just, I think, today, last week. So this was a review which was commissioned by the UK government this time last year, that asked Professor Sullivan to look at how, whether there's any obstacles to accurate data collection and research on sex and gender identity in public bodies, and also said good practice guidance on how to collect sex and gender. And what was particularly stood out of that to me was that she specifically cited instances where the conflation of sex and gender data could lead to operational risks in the health service, but also in policing. There were specific examples that were cited. So I suppose my request is, I think we appreciate that good things do take time, and that from a legal perspective it is an evolving field. However, where I think throughout your review, where throughout the Police Competence Review you identify areas of policy that do present either a legal risk or financial risk, but also operational risk, where the way that Police Scotland approaches data capture may well lead to risks, as I say, in that operational space, that those policies are being addressed as a matter of priority, because I don't think we need to, perfect doesn't need to be the enemy of good, I think, in the space. So I suppose that is just something that's very, I think, quite important. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. Chris, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah.
And then I'll ask the Chief Constable to come in.
I think so. There's not much to add to that. I think, all of these sources of information that you've referred to are all very important. I don't think it shouldn't be down to individual public bodies to navigate the complexity of this and infer the right answer that is both legally compliant and proportionate in terms of the solution to this. So, as you know, we're essentially twin tracking this by having Police Scotland's internal review and ensuring that we surface this issue where we can with the HRC. Well, we and others really need guidance on this issue.
That's helpful, thanks. And before I bring DCC Spears in, I think Katrina wanted to come in. No? All right. Thank you. DCC Spears.
Just to build on Chris's comment, as much as we are committed to undertake a review, create a short life working group, we are reporting very regular, as Katerina will know, through the performance committee, and we brought an update to the committee only last week. One of the key elements that I've spoken about back in September at the board was our commitment to keep a close look at the UK and to the Scottish landscape. So the tribunals that emerge across the UK, we have an excellent relationship and connection with the National Police Chiefs Council, so we're well cited, and we subtly and quietly would look at the learning that would stem from those cases. We're sensitive to the judicial process and not one that would say more about. We monitor parliamentary debates, and we know there was one recently. I'm also aware of Professor Sullivan's report, which was only published last week, but these are elements that we will look at. So I just wanted to give board members an assurance that whilst we think there's other detail and support that we need from the Equality and Human Rights Commission, we need some of the decisions coming out of the Supreme Court that will help and inform our next steps, that would also allow us to engage with stakeholders. We are alive to the broader emerging commentary from right across the UK.
That's helpful. Thanks very much indeed. And as you both have said, that this is complex, and I think it is important to be balanced and measured and not be one-sided, and that in its very nature is a bit of a paradox. The very nature means it does take time, but actually we want to make sure that things are progressed at pace and that everyone is treated with dignity and respect, and we are of course legally compliant. So we look forward to hearing about the progress of that. Thank you very much indeed. Katrina.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, I just, in relation to your annual delivery plan, my question is, are you confident the budget allocation for the SPA is adequate to ensure the delivery of that plan and robust and effective oversight of policing for the year ahead?
Yes, we are confident. The level of detail underpinning the delivery plan reads across to the resources we have, the very specific resources we have in the team, which are fully budgeted, as you can imagine. So in terms of budget versus delivery, there are no issues with that. Thank you.
Grant.
Thank you. I wonder if I could raise an item in relation to Appendix A on the Scottish Railway Policing Committee. I noticed fairly well through the report there's reference to the outstanding open actions on audit and inspection reports. And whilst I've no idea from just the straight number of them whether some are high importance and are lower importance, but it does seem to be quite a number of them, and I wonder if there are plans to actually have a delivery plan to get these reduced and the various actions eliminated. I'm very conscious from ARAC how difficult it is to deal with large numbers of outstanding items, so it was just to highlight that and hope there's a plan to get them down. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Forgive me, but I don't have the answer to that immediately, but I think it's an important point, and I'm happy to take that one away and make sure that that's responded to. Thank you.
And we can obviously note that in the minute. Mary, you're a member of the...
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that the committee, the Railway Policing Committee, is very much alive to this issue and doing exactly as we're doing within ARAC and trying to make sure that any outstanding recommendations, particularly where they're impactful, are being progressed as a matter of urgency, and we have the full commitment of the British Transport Police to take that forward.
So if there are no further questions of Chris, I'm going to suggest we take a 9-minute break and return at 11:25 prompt, please. Agenda item 7 for the budget. We're over to you with the CFO, James.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So the 25-26 budget is the culmination of about 6 months' worth of work in order to present a balanced budget position for 25-26. I'll start by speaking to Appendix A, Slide 2, which is the budget highlights. The first thing to point out is that the funding uplift, the core funding uplift for revenue next year is £56.7 million. Now, we've obviously everybody's aware that the employer national insurance contribution rates are going to go up at the start of the next financial year. And for the SBA Police Scotland, that is an increase or a cost pressure of £25 million for the organisation. At the position that we have in the budget here, as you can see on the budget highlights, is that is going to be funded to the tune of 60% by Scottish Government, which is £15.2 million. But that still leaves a pressure in year of £10 million that we will need to find on a recurring basis to meet that cost. So during the course of 25-26, we will be able to use a one-off benefit that we get from a lower pensions contribution rate to meet that gap in the national insurance. But as I say, during the course of 25-26, we will need to find £10 million to fund that on a recurring basis. In addition to that, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there are already £9.3 million worth of efficiencies built in to this budget in the non-pay area. And that really is squeezing the non-pay as hard as we can at present. And the Police Scotland has the lowest percentage of its budget spent on non-pay of any police service in the UK, where in Police Scotland it's 14% compared to a UK average of 23%. Moving round the slide to workforce and pay budgets, as the Chief Constable had said earlier on, there is sufficient budget to maintain police officers around 16,500 for the year ahead and staff numbers at 5,900. There'll also be workforce modernisation, and that's been built into the budget, and that will be supported through additional funding from Scottish Government during the course of the 25-26 financial year of £10 million, which we expect to be transferred through the spring budget revisions in early 2026. With regards to the pay award for 25-26, we have made provision in the budget for an evidence-based pay award and something that's consistent with the public sector pay policy. And as I say, with regards to non-pay, we are 14% of our budget is on non-pay, which is focused around premises, transport, digital and legal costs and kit and equipment for police officers. So it's quite tight. It's just around the core tools that police officers and staff require to do the job. We've also taken what we've called an income challenge, so a stretch target on our income budget of £2.7 million. So that's not yet identified how we will achieve that income, but based on previous year's trends, we think we should be able to get there. But again, it's just demonstrating that we're putting stretch into this budget and putting targets onto teams. Then with regards to reform, there is £20.3 million for reform in the year ahead. In previous years, you'll be probably familiar with the figure of 25 million. The figure of 20.3 will still have the same impact for reform. The reason it's reduced is that there were a number of members of staff that were included within the previous year's 25 million that were permanent members of staff, and we've just transferred those across into the core revenue budget. So the actual spending power of reform remains consistent with the previous year. And then finally, on the funding aspect, we have got capital funding of £70 million for the year ahead, augmented with an additional £1 million of capital receipts to give us a capital programme of 71 million, which is an increase again on the current year and shows a year-on-year upward trajectory on the capital allocation. And the final point is on what's not included within this budget, which is on the top left-hand side of the slide. There is no money in for new legislation. That will be dealt with through the spring budget revision process, where we see cost pressures coming through, and we'll have those conversations with government as the year progresses. And there's no money in the budget for Commonwealth Games, but we will be seeking to get cost recovery on during the 25-26 year for the planning team costs and all the planning costs associated with the Commonwealth Games. And there is no money in the budget for any large one-off events such as the US presidential visit. So again, we would seek additional funding for that when we understand what the cost implications of that might be. Moving on from that to maybe just touch upon the slide 6, which is the funding slide. That just sets out the increases in funding for the year ahead across revenue at 4.1%. Reform, as I say, in reality is flat, even although it's gone from 25 to 20.6, reflecting the fact that we've just moved across permanent staff from reform into the revenue. And on capital, you can see that there's been an increase again of 8.4%. And at the bottom, just the additional confirmation around national insurance funding of 60% and an additional £10 million coming in during the course of the year to support modernisation. You can see how that's proposed to be allocated across Police Scotland, the SPA and Forensic Services on slide 8. Police Scotland representing by far the largest component part at over 96%, but you can see how the allocations have been split and how that's supported by the funding on the bottom half of that table to set out a balanced position. And then I'll not talk through the slides that break down each of the different lines of the budget because people have had opportunity to see that, but I would just touch upon the capital budget, which is on slide 18. And just to say to that we have allocated, or we're proposing to allocate funding of £86.9 million in the 25-26 financial year, which is an over-allocation of £15.9 million, which is something that we do year on year in order to ensure that we get different business areas spending the money. And then, if need be, we can defer some of that into the following financial year, but it's in order to get that spend moving. Because, as you know, we have, in previous years, seen a slow start in capital spending that leads to a backloading, and it's to help support, us moving away from that, as well as a number of other measures that have been put in place to help with that. Slide 19 just sets out the proposed allocation of the reform budget. And again, a proposal to allocate 36.5 million at the start of the year, which is an over-allocation again, which is, as I say, we've done in previous years, and that over-allocation of £16.2 million will need to be managed in order to get us back to the budget, the funding of 20.3. And then the final two slides, slide 21 and slide 22, just sets out the financial challenges and risks. Slide 21 more on the external challenges, where you can see public sector pay is the single biggest variable. That will be a challenge for us, as it has been in previous years. But as you can see on the slide, public inquiries, the cost of legislation that's not yet been met. These are pressures and issues that we'll need to pick up during the course of the year. But this will also factor into be a factor that we could take into consideration in the financial planning work that we will start to kick off in April, and we'll look to bring back to the board in June, that will set out these kind of thematic and bring that kind of context around where our pressures are coming from. But we will manage those during the course of 25-26. And then on slide 22, those financial threats and opportunities are more of the ones that are internal, that are based on the budget assumptions that have been built into this budget. But I'll pause there, Chair, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
James, thanks very much indeed, and thank you for your elegant presentation of the work. And I know it belies the effort and the complexity of what it does to take us here to present a balanced budget. So I think we're very grateful to you and your team. Before I open it up, I'm going to ask Deputy Chief Executive Chris Brown if you want to comment on anything.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James, for that summary. I think so. This process has been particularly challenging, I think, this year, given the headwinds that James has described. So I think the amount of work that happens beneath the waterline, so to speak, shouldn't be underestimated. And James and his team, and actually all of our Police Scotland colleagues, deserve our thanks for landing something that's balanced. I think it maximises the funding available. We always have to work within a particular financial envelope, and I think this budget does that, especially given the headwinds that we're having to contend with as well. And I think fundamentally it supports the Chief Constable's vision and 3-year business plan as well. That's very evident, I think, particularly in the workforce modernisation. And lastly, I think in terms of the process that got us here, we've had the Budget Development Group, we've had Resources Committee, the budget's been discussed exhaustively. There's an element of co-creation here, I think, where board members feel that they have some input into how this is shaped. So on that basis, on behalf of the accountable officer, I would recommend this budget for approval.
Thanks very much indeed, Chris. Now, we have the budget and there's sections to it. So there's a Police Scotland section, there's forensic section, and there's SPA corporate. So I think we'll take the questions in that order, and I'll start off in terms of looking at the Police Scotland section. I'll start off with Mary.
Chair, and I'd add my thanks to James and his team, as well as colleagues in the SPA, for the work that's been done to get us to this point, and also thank you for that very clear summary of what is a complicated and complex report. So thank you very much. My questions are rather for the Chief Constable about the delivery of policing within this budget. So I wonder if I could ask, are you confident that you can police Scotland effectively, keep people safe, and deliver the annual police plan with the budget that we now know we have allocated to us for next year?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Before I answer the specific, I just wanted to add and in some way echo what the Chair and the Chief Exec has said. I think we collectively advocated really strongly for this budget. We did so with a clear vision, a credible plan, and an organisation with a really strong track record around reform, efficiency, driving the benefits for the public in terms of meeting threat, harm and risk, being able to identify where we need to be able to respond to threats that are coming, and the way in which crime and disorder is changing across the country, and at the same time pushing forward with our plan in relation to workforce modernisation and that workforce mix. So really grateful to everybody who contributed to that, and it started back in the autumn and has been a journey to get to where we are. There are some financial pressures, as James has articulated really strongly there, but at the same time, we all recognise in this room that the fiscal position across Scotland and across the broader United Kingdom, and we are not immune, and we are not immune to that. So it is for us to advocate strongly and then drive the efficiency and the delivery of good quality policing. Specifically to your question, ensuring that Scotland continues to be a safe place is my absolute commitment and priority, and I'm confident with this budget settlement and with the plans within our 3-year and our annual police plan that we're going to come on to, and the skill and commitment of the whole workforce and you as an authority, that we will both deliver and ensure there's a balanced budget, and I take both of those very, very, very seriously. Thank you.
Chief Constable, I have another couple of related questions, if that's okay. The issue of officer numbers, we could look at that perhaps. The figure quoted in the report is 16,500, roughly. Can you tell us what impact that will have on capacity and on the service provided to Scotland's communities?
So that's the planning assumption as we sit here now, heading towards the new financial year. One of the key pillars within the plan is that workforce mix and the modernisation, and what we've seen and what we've progressed in recent months is looking at areas of business where the service can be delivered by non-warranted officers, and we've referenced through the Complaints and Conduct Committee there issues around backlog, around public complaints. In order to tackle that, there is skill in relation to investigative skills, but you don't need a warrant card and the powers of an officer to do so. So it's one of the areas where we've started to dip our toe into bringing in non-warranted individuals with an investigative background and skill in order to support us across a number of areas of business. And I'll bring DCC Smith in a moment to talk more broadly around that. So I'm really confident that that is absolutely the right way and the right direction for us to travel, because we would be putting officers into those roles, and very often they would be experienced officers. And I need those experienced officers, particularly those who are sergeants and inspectors. I need them leading our teams, who are often quite inexperienced. So we're on a transition, and that's set against that 16,500 police officers. But I'm confident with that workforce mix that we can deliver our objectives, keep the people of Scotland safe. But it's worth just going into a bit more detail in terms of also around generating capacity for our workforce. So I'll ask Bex to pick that up.
Thanks, Chief, and thanks for the question. I think one of the most important points around this, actually, that the Chief Constable's touched on is this work still needs doing. So whether it's investigative work, whether it's vetting, whether it sits in professional standards, whatever that might be, we would be putting officers into those roles. So it's not work we can stop, I think, is the point. So therefore, your question was around the 16.5 and the workforce mix. The approach that we've taken, which is used broadly across England and Wales in policing, is to bring in other skills into the organisation to fill those gaps, which we know is really important. I would much rather be in a position where we're looking at capacity, we're looking at the skills that we need, we're looking at the capabilities that we require moving forward, and we're bringing people into the workforce who can deliver that for us and putting warranted officers back onto the front line. We're in year one. We've had some successes within Digital Division and within C3, where we've managed to repurpose officers back to divisions, which is really important. We've got an ambitious plan in year two through the business plan to do that through firearms licensing, more investigators and other roles as well. And your specific question was around 16.5. I think with the ambition to bolster the workforce in terms of civilian staff, we will be in a position to be able to utilise officers more effectively in the front line and fulfil our work around that. But I think also it's really important to see the work that we're doing in terms of demand reduction alongside that, the utilisation of digital technology that we're pulling through the plan, desk, body-worn, all of those things will save demand on the front line and increase the capacity of our officers. So it's really difficult to look at it through one lens in terms of workforce. I think it's a multi-layered plan that will show our commitment in terms of reinvesting all of that within the front line.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. At a time when budgets are still challenging, as the Chief Constable recognised in her comments earlier, it's all the more important that we are willing to look at these sorts of things and that we can put them in place quickly and monitor the effectiveness of them. And we've been talking about some of these things for a while, so it's good to see it happening, and I think it will be helpful in terms of workforce mix. My final question is around the impact on workforce well-being. Now, you know, there's different ways of handling that, but I'm sure you would want to be very careful about asking the workforce to take on a lot more if the demand can't be reduced and we have so many demands on us. So I wondered if you could say something about the impact of this budget on workforce well-being.
Thank you. When I joined the organisation 18 months ago, what was really made, you know, loud and clear in terms of feedback from frontline. And frontline, you've heard me say this before, frontline isn't just response officers, but those, you know, my loose description is, you know, people who have contact with victims, with perpetrators, with communities, and I would include colleagues in our control rooms in that. But what came loud and clear is that there was a significant amount of pressure on that front line, and often they were some of the most inexperienced. So some of the you know, and leading this organisation, that isn't something that I can just ignore and think, well, somehow, you know, that situation will improve. We have needed to take a number of measures to try and address that. And one of the things that came across really, really loudly was work-life balance for those officers. So trying, when you work shift work, trying to get a weekend off was a challenge, you know, and these are weddings and birthdays and anniversaries and main holidays with children, not something I could ignore. So there is a number of areas of work to try and address that, and I'll flag up just a couple, as they don't come without their challenges. But we've moved to a forced mobilisation approach, where we are seeking to bring on 10 days in the year officers who have a role that is predominantly day shifts, and asking them to work over those weekends, and also on what we call high demand days. So we're looking ahead and we're saying that's going to be a particularly busy day because of X, bringing colleagues from other roles. Now, there is some pressure that exists there, but in terms of work-life balance, in terms of equity within the workforce, there needs to be a response from us and from me that evens that up and allows people to get time off with their colleagues. And in addition to that, from the public's point of view, what we had seen particularly over weekends, where, you know, whether it's sporting events, whether it's other demands on us, was our response in terms of our emergency response wasn't where I wanted it to be, because the same pressures were coming on that group of officers and staff. So better response for the public, and, you know, a further layer, and we'll all be aware of the catastrophic events in Southport last summer. There's a reminder to us that not only this organisation has a fantastic pedigree around being able to respond to big events, whether that's COP26 or whether it's Operation Unicorn, but we also have to be able to respond to the spontaneous. You know, so there's the reminder: Southport, Manchester Arena. And so very much, and you know, there is some tension here, you know, saying to colleagues who are working on predominantly day shifts 10 times a year, you need to, you know, support. Now, that clearly has an impact on their day job, but we've worked through the metrics around that, and if I'm balancing sort of threat and risk and the needs of our staff and officers and their well-being, you know, I think we need to even up where some of the pressure is coming. And then they're just two arms of this. You know, when we've talked about body-worn video and we've talked about mental health and case summary, all of this impacts positively on the front line and seeks to even it up and support colleagues. And we saw, of course, not only did I hear that, but then that came through in the survey as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those.
That's grand. Thanks very much indeed. Caroline, do you have a question? No? Okay. Well, I'll pass over to Grant then.
Chair, first of all, I'd just like to pay tribute to the huge amount of work by James Gray and his team for arriving at this end position. James has already highlighted that some of the costs will be met by non-recurring funding, so it's almost laying down a challenge for 26, 27 and beyond. The detailed scrutiny has been made to the Budget Development Group, and we spent over an hour on studying the budget and options at the Resources Committee quite recently. So I'm not going to ask any detailed questions on that because I've already satisfied myself on them. But I would like to mention that at the discussion at the Resources Committee, we benefited from having DCC Connors and Smith present to produce a sort of an operational dimension to our discussions, which was extremely helpful in being sure that it wasn't just the numbers, it was actually taken in context of how they will actually be delivered. So I'm very glad we're setting a balanced revenue budget. And the only real question for I suppose, the senior leadership team as a whole is how confident are you that this is achievable and how you will monitor delivery of it in the course of the year.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Grant. So the monitoring of it, we will do on a monthly basis with a real focus, I think, in the early months on capital. And we have already set out the profiling, which is indicated in the budget report, and that's something that we'll be really closely monitoring on. So immediately when we see slippage, we'll be delving in to understand what's lying behind that. Some of the activity that was undertaken earlier this year was intended to get us on a better footing to spend more earlier in the year. So DCC Connors had chaired a capital task force, and that's looking at bringing in some targeted additional resource to help move forward capital spending earlier in the year. As I say, we're tightening up on the monitoring, and actually with the work that we've done in the current year, well, albeit a lot of the spend is backloaded and we've still got a bit to go before the end of Monday, we should see a good strong pipeline of spend coming through into April. So during the course of 25-26, you can expect to see a real improvement in the profile of the capital spend. However, to really get to the place we want to be, what we're proposing to do during the course of the summer is look at multi-year capital planning. Now, we may not have certainty over funding on capital planning, but we will undertake multi-year capital planning and detailed planning in line with the work that DCC Smith is doing around the transformation piece, as well as the BAU replacement, so that by the time we get to the autumn, our intention would be that we would have a position where we had indicative capital budgets for the next 3 years ahead, and would look to seek endorsement for those teams to then start the planning activity to proceed in advance of actually having confirmation from government around the funding, because that is the only way we will break out of this annualised cycle, is if we act as though it isn't an annualised cycle. And that's what I think we need to take forward. So as I say, an improvement you'll see coming through in the next year, but with that new approach, hopefully in the years ahead, you'll see far more smoothing of spend.
Thank you very much. Certainly, for an organisation of this size and scale, trying to work on an annual allocation, the annuality approach is just inappropriate, and we need, I've advocated for a while, a longer term planning, so I'm delighted you're working on a sort of 5-year plan to do this. I'm sure that will make it a lot easier to plan operationally as well as delivery, if we can actually make some further progress in that direction. Trying to land this sort of budget on a pin is, on this scale is just a totally inappropriate way to deal with an organisation of this size. But I do recognise the challenges that come with the public finance rules. Thank you, and good luck.
Thanks for that, Grant. And before I pass to Caroline, I think you're right. I think with the public sector finance rules, they are what they are, and we need to commend and encourage the team to work within them so that we can maximise and concentrate on what we can do, which is really helpful. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do have a question. Apologies for that. Thank you, James, and to your team for putting together another great budget. So thank you for that and for all the hard work that you do. My question is actually for the Chief Constable, though. Your 2030 vision and this budget proposal reiterates a commitment to prioritising the front line. And I'm just wondering, what does this mean? Can it be tracked or monitored? You know my obsession about measuring things. And how will the public feel that? Will it be through increased visibility of policemen or women or improved response times? I'm just wondering how you plan to measure that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've described some examples today as to where we've brought in additional resource and allocated those resources into key areas where we see either pressures or we want to increase our performance. But to your point, in terms of us being forensic around that, that's probably a work in progress. You've probably guessed I was going to say that, and we do need to be able to be very transparent as to where we've made those movements, where we can see the impact. So I talked a bit earlier there in terms of response times at times of high demand. So that would be one area where we'd look to see improvements. But also from our staff's point of view, I'm hoping to see some of that in the survey.
Right.
She says, holding her breath. But I think that will be a 2-3 year program or journey As we've said earlier, while the numbers look big in terms of some of the impact of some of the schemes and focus we put, can you actually feel that as an individual officer, you know, working at St Leonard's today? Probably not yet, but you know, I'm hopeful that that's where we are going to see it. And we talked previously, didn't we, about doing pulse surveys. Yeah. So there's some outward-looking indicators in terms of response times, our performance around our crime performance, and then what do our workforce feel like, and then over and above that, you know, confidence and satisfaction. Yes. In the organisation, key indicator, and we get a good response from the public in relation to that, and I think we should use that as a sort of guiding North Star in terms of are we making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think if members are content with the Police Scotland overview, you want something for Police Scotland, Pauline?
Thanks, Chair, and I want to echo other colleagues' comments about the effort and the work that's gone into this budget to present a balanced position in very challenging financial circumstances. James, you mentioned, however, that some of the savings this year are being made on a non-recurrent basis. What is going to be the approach to finding those savings on a recurring basis so that we can have that balanced financial plan in a more sustainable way?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there are about £10 million worth of non-recurring items that are helping to fund the position this year. So the primary focus as we move into the next year is looking at the police staff workforce and making sure that we're driving efficiency through ESR, Enabling Services Review, and other areas. We will also be looking to put plans in place around the modernisation of the police estate, which, whilst it will improve the overall quality and improve the experience of officers and staff, it will also result in a smaller estate, not necessarily fewer locations, but smaller, which, whilst improving quality, will also reduce cost, and looking at other initiatives as we move forward, and most of which will ultimately, you know, come through the overall change and transformation agenda. So there's an understanding that we don't need to have enacted the savings, but we will need to have identified them so that they can be put in place for 26-27, to pick up where that shortfall will emerge as a consequence of those one-offs not playing into 26-27. But there's a good understanding across the organisation that that's what needs to happen. So, you know, be working hard and over the coming months to be able to develop those and have options to put on the table as we move into the budget cycle for 26-27.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That's helpful. I think we're going to move on to the forensic services aspect of the budget. And Katrina, I think you have a question for Fiona.
Thank you. Well, like my colleagues, I just want to say I am, as ever, in complete awe at the scale of this work. Yeah. So, no, my question is really, as per others, is around forensics confidence in terms of, you know, the budget for forensic services being adequate to ensure the provision of an efficient forensic service to the criminal justice system.
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes, I am confident that we can continue to deliver services within forensic services to support Police Scotland, the Crown Office and other partners within the justice system. It also allows us to continue on our transformation of forensic services through the finalisation of the implementation of our operating model. And to drive forward the remaining benefits which we need to see from that work. The main risk within the budget for forensic services remains the forensic toxicology provision for drug driving analysis, and the budget assumes that the demand in that area continues at the level that we have set out within the Memorandum of Understanding with colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, it is in the list of financial threats in the budget, isn't it? But it's relatively low, the forensic toxicology. Yeah.
It's very dependent upon what that demand change might be, and it's under constant scrutiny and discussion within the Forensic Services Committee.
And we need to make sure that we continue to look at how we utilise this testing in such an important area, and that we progress the investment case for a long-term sustainable model for drug driving toxicology provision that's in line with the ambition of Police Scotland in terms of the use of roadside testing. We will continue to monitor the demand as the year progresses. But it's very important that in order to ensure that the cases proceed to prosecution within appropriate timescales, that we make sure we continue to use outsourcing to complement the internal capacity that Forensic Services has.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Yes, it's just continuing to probe on that point. I hear what you say about it being relatively low, and in the box chart on page 22, or the diagram on page 22, it is in the low probability and low impact, or relatively low, medium probability, relatively low impact. But we did see demand exceeding the MOU this year. So I do still have a concern. So my question is, what are our contingencies should that happen again this financial year?
The Memorandum of Understanding sets out a number of different areas of focus should we continue to see an increase in demand for the drug driving toxicology analysis. So we will always be looking to drive efficiency and to grow internal capacity. We will continue to work with our outsourcing provider in terms of the provision that they use to support the overall delivery of demand. We are always looking at the resourcing within the toxicology team within Forensic Services, and if budget allows, then we do look at whether we can move resource from an area where there is less demand or reducing demand within Forensic Services to support areas of growth.
Thanks very much for that. It's just you can run as effective and efficient a service as you like, but this is a demand that comes from somewhere else, and it's not 100% within your control. So it's just to flag that up.
Thanks very much for that. Pauline, I know you had an interest in this. Has it been covered? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So if we're content to move on from forensics to SPA corporate, Katrina, do you have a question?
Well, I asked it to the CEO's report, which was really about confidence in the budget and deliverability.
Yes, thanks, Katrina. Just to build on that, members will notice that the SP Corporate has zero growth in its budget year on year. It's probably important to mention that within that, the headcount is being maintained of the corporate function, but the cost pressures associated with that, namely pay award and national insurance, are more than offset by the savings that we will be making by relocating to a Police Scotland building for almost the entirety of the next financial year. So that's about £300,000 worth of annual savings that we'll be delivering. So yes, it's the same headcount. We'll be able to build on the work from this year that was recognised in the HMICS strategic review of the SPA, so we don't see any degradation as a result of the budget. Thank you.
That's really assuring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've given that a good going over, and if board members have no further questions, can I ask members to approve the SP budget for 25 and 26, and along with that the schedule of rates for events and other services also for 25 and 26? Yes. Thank you very much indeed. So we're now going to move on to the joint equality outcomes for policing. Agenda item 8. I'm going to hand over to Chris, who I think will ask Amanda to say a few words, and then I'll hand over to DCC speakers.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'm delighted to be joined by Amanda Coulthard, the Authority's Head of Strategy and Performance. Just before I hand over to Amanda, I just wondered if maybe DCC Spears wanted to say a few words by way of introduction.
Yeah, thank you. I probably had quite a bit to say, so maybe just say a few words and let Amanda go first. But obviously what we're presenting here are the equality outcomes for 25-29, and also supported by a mainstream report. What I would say, Chair, is that there's been a really detailed discussion, pretty much a deep dive coming through the Policing Together Oversight Board chaired by Tom Halpin. So to give you a confidence there has been a huge discussion around this. It's a collaborative piece of work. It brings together the work of Police Scotland, particularly around policing together, the people function, and we call colleagues at the SPA. But I'll say a little bit more about the outcomes and maybe the mainstreaming report, which I guess will interest board members around what progress are we making. But perhaps I'll pause and let Amanda go first.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, DCC. I think just a few words of introduction in terms of the reports that are presented today. As the DCC has said, it's a joint endeavour. It's equality outcomes for the policing system, not specifically for Police Scotland. This is the second iteration of a joint equality outcome document, and I think we see real progress in the outcomes that are set for 25-29, showing our depth of understanding of what those outcomes should be and what we've delivered over the last 4 years and how we progress that. It's been delivered through a joint short life working group that sits across both Police Scotland and the authority, and I think that model has worked very well for us in terms of building an evidence bank and a rationale for the way forward. There is real evolution, I think, in what we are presenting today, and we are still finding our way in terms of what that evidence bank looks like and how we, particularly, it's a topic that's come up in discussion today already, how we measure impact and progress, how we show the real contribution that's made across the entirety of the policing system to the delivery of outcomes. We know that equality is something that sits across every part of the 3 organisations that make up the policing system in Scotland. There are key documents that really drive delivery, but the focus for us, particularly in relation to mainstreaming, is on how we embed and make core equalities in everything that we do across the system. And you can see that both through the outcomes that are set for the next 4 years and the mainstreaming documents that show the progress we've made and our commitments going forward.
Okay, thanks. DCC Spears.
Just a couple of comments around the outcomes, and I think again just to give you an assurance that when we've developed the quality outcomes, they have built on the outcomes we had for 21-25. We've ensured that they align to strategic policing outcomes. They're underpinned by our vision, our policing together strategy, and our people strategy, just but to name a few. So they are absolutely aligned. They focus on the voice of communities, so you'll see that 4 of the outcomes linked to the work that we do in local communities, and another 3 linked very specifically to the work within Police Scotland. We will bring 6 monthly reports back around the mainstreaming work that we're undertaking, and I think that's the crux of our challenges going forward. There's a lot of detail contained within the appendix around the mainstreaming work that we're doing. I think the implementation or the mechanism for delivery of the outcomes is through our Policing Together plans and the work that ACC Payton would lead on in that space. We have robust governance arrangements in place. We have a real focus on much of the work around discrimination, and that obviously aligns closely to the Equality Act and how we would eliminate discrimination. The culture dashboard that we have developed will go some way towards actually starting to quantify the progress that we've made. A focus on EQHRIA, and we've strengthened our commitments in that space. And I also think the voice of our people will be vitally important, and we'll use workforce surveys to help us drive that forward. I think one of the other key elements that will add huge value, and we've seen value over the last 4 years around the support of independent advisory groups, and board members will be familiar with them. We're looking going into the new financial year to introduce an independent police advisory council, which will be a single function that will support much of the work that we do in this space. So we recognise the need for, one, a degree of independence, but also a degree of expertise. So we're going to refresh the approach that we take. A number of those advisory groups have reached a natural conclusion, but we will introduce a new advisory council. So I would be confident through the Policing Together Oversight Group, those board members will get a really key insight into the work that we're taking forward. that in no way covers the level of detail that colleagues have worked on, both in terms of the mainstream report and the work done around the 7 equality outcomes. But happy to pause there if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed to everyone's introduction to that. I have been notified that Chris, you would like to ask some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, DCC. Yes, there's probably 3 things I just wanted to touch on in questions, all of which you've referred to already. So just, really to provide an opportunity to say a little bit more about each of them, and they relate to alignment, prioritisation, and measurement. And perhaps if I touch on alignment and prioritisation first, but just before I do that, I mean, recognising absolutely, and obviously I've been involved in some of this work with a different hat on in the past. I recognise that we're making a very significant amount of progress here. It takes time, but I recognise the progress that's been made and the joint endeavour involved in that. And the scrutiny, the ongoing scrutiny that is really important to that. In terms of my questions around alignment and prioritisation, I guess the first of those around alignment. So obviously there's a very strong emphasis in all of this work on strategic alignment, and that's welcome. And the work that has been done over time. In order to refresh and recalibrate the approach of policing together is really important in that regard. I'm particularly interested in the relationship between our workforce outcomes and our service delivery outcomes, recognising, of course, that workforce outcomes in relation to equality have a significance in their own right for our workforce, but recognising also that they are a key driver to the efficacy of our service delivery outcomes. And so I wondered if either of you wanted to say any more about that. And secondly, in terms of prioritisation, obviously prioritisation is really critical to the efficacy of delivery in an area like this. One-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. We can't do all of the things all of the time. So there is a welcome, I think, emphasis on prioritisation in relation to the outcomes in terms of protected characteristics. And I wondered if you wanted to say more about the approach that you've taken, which obviously needs to be really robust in terms of prioritisation, the approach that you've taken and the rationale for that prioritisation.
If I can make a start on alignment, Chair, and thank you, Chris. I think we have had a lot of discussion about the symbiosis between service delivery and workforce outcomes. We recognise that workforce outcomes change the culture of the organisation in terms of delivery. They are fully embedded in the wider work that's underway within the system around culture. But if we can drive the progress that we are aiming to drive in terms of the workforce outcomes and how both officers and staff feel across the system, it absolutely changes the face of service delivery as well and enables the delivery of the service delivery outcomes. Some of our service delivery outcomes are more general in terms of practice of the system and how services are delivered. Some are more specific to particular service delivery areas and where we know there's a bigger need. But we absolutely were focused on developing both activities and milestones that sit underneath the equality outcomes that describe the dependencies between service delivery and workforce outcomes to ensure that we make the biggest difference from the investment across all 7 of those. I'm sure the DCC has more detail on that.
I think alignment is encapsulated in our vision for policing for 2030. And when you look at those 4 key elements to the vision, 3 of them are focused on safer communities, less crime and better outcomes for victims. But central to that is a thriving workforce. And from my perspective, we will not deliver on less crime, safer communities, better outcomes for victims if we don't have a thriving workforce. So I think that will be a huge enabler when we start to think about how do we measure performance well, the work that Patrick and his team have been doing is around developing a performance dashboard that doesn't just focus on crime, but it focuses on all four elements of our vision. So when we measure the positive outcomes in terms of keeping communities and people within our communities safe, we'll also be focusing on a thriving workforce. So I think probably for the first time in my experience, the vision starts to bring that together. When we come on and talk about the annual police plan, we will see the connection. We look at the 3-year police plan, we see a broader connection. So I think in the past, Chris, in my experience, there's occasions where you try to work out how do you have everything flowing in an equitable way in the same way. And I think the enabler for us to do that is through our vision. I think that the Policing Together implementation work is vital. What I would say about Policing Together in part is coordination. So the team there have got to work really closely with all aspects of operational policing through DCC Connors portfolio, because a lot of that work needs to be done more locally. So when you start to think about developing our leadership programmes, developing our management training, looking at how we select for promotion, all of those things wind back to what we are trying to achieve in this space. So I'm really confident in terms of the platform that we've set up going into the next financial year and in the next 4 years in terms of how we would deliver on those outcomes.
Thank you. Can you might have more questions, Chris, but can I bring Amanda in as well, please?
Just to pick up on the second part of your question, Chris, in terms of prioritisation, it is always a difficult balance with equality outcomes that by their very nature they're intended to be focused on specific groups and to be prioritised down to where we think we can make the biggest difference or where there's the biggest need. So the evidence review that was the very first stage of developing the new equality outcomes was focused on where have we made a difference in 4 years and where do we think we've still got more work to do to allow us to refine the outcomes we had previously into what we're proposing for the next 4 years. One of the things that was very helpful in refining that model was the stakeholder feedback that we got through the engagement process. So both internal to the policing system and across partners, we sought feedback on outcomes, and we have refined the language and the protected characteristics that are targeted through those 7 outcomes as a result of the feedback that we've had. We recognise that there's work to be done across all characteristics and across the society. However, we have focused in particularly for the first 2 years of these 4-year outcomes on where we think there is an opportunity for us to make the biggest difference. As we develop our progress report in 2027, we'll be thinking about what we need to do next and whether we need to tweak our outcomes to reflect where the biggest need is. But we were very focused on balance there and ensuring that we took as much action as we possibly could where we had identified need while still working to the spirit of equality outcomes.
Thank you. Thanks very much for both of those answers. I think they're really helpful, and I'm certainly assured on the alignment point. And on the prioritisation point, I guess I wanted to surface that because, of course, there are sensitivities there. And so taking a really robust evidence-based approach to prioritisation. Prioritisation is critical, but the sensitivities involved underline the criticality. I wonder if I just move on to measurement, and I think you've both touched on this already, but just in case there was any more that you want to say, and DCC Spears, you've particularly touched on this, but just in case any more that you want to say about how we will collate, coordinate, aggregate evidence in this area to measure progress, because obviously it is critical, as has come up a number of times in relation to other things this morning.
I'll just say maybe 3 things in response to that, Chris. So firstly, we've refreshed our Policing Together strategy and our pillars, and we recognise that we probably need to strengthen the communities aspect of that, and for that's our ability to have a reach in to those harder to reach communities. I think the introduction of the advisory council will go some way to helping us. So I'm pretty excited about the bank of people that we would want to attract to work with us, and I have seen over recent years the value around having having that independent element. So for me, that's vitally important. I think secondly, it's listening to both our staff and to our communities. So we're looking at confidence, satisfaction, but also through the staff surveys. So we will continue to build on the suite of questions and commentary that we've encouraged from our staff and be really, really reflective as to how we react to that. And I think the other element is to look at what are some of the more measurable, tangible, statistical pieces of data that we can draw on. And I think for the first time in Police Scotland's time, we have developed that sort of culture dashboard that will allow us to look at within inside the organisation first and foremostly about what is that telling us in terms of whether it's grievance or complaints or conduct allegations or tribunal matters. So there's a whole suite of measures in there that we will work hard on. So that's an approach, and I think it sets us up to, we might always not find the results that we want to see, but will give us the results and information that will allow us to act and react to where we are within the organisation.
Yeah.
I think just to add a bit of SPA Corporate and Forensic Services detail to that Police Scotland overview. Obviously, the majority of front-facing service delivery sits within Police Scotland, and there will be really comprehensive data there, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that will tell a story of delivery of equality outcomes. The Appendix A of the Equality Outcomes document is a visual of how many different strategies and plans across the policing system support delivery of equality outcomes. I think what that highlights is that real delivery of equality outcomes and mainstreaming in particular sits across the entirety of our workforce in the policing system. It's everyone's job to do, and the strategies and plans that are highlighted there, whether they're specific to Police Scotland across the full system or the strategies that sit in both SPA Corporate and Forensic Services, the work that we have to do in terms of implementation, as you say, Chris, is about collation, coordination and aggregation of all of that progress into the story of equality outcome delivery over the next 4 years.
People content with that?
Yes, thanks very much. I think that emphasis on multiple, the plurality of lenses, and also the relationship between measurement and scrutiny that you've emphasised, DCC Spears, I think is really helpful. Thank you.
And I think was it Katrina?
Yes, actually, Chris, you've kind of covered some areas that I would, was interested in as well. As I alluded earlier, I do want to say something about the privilege of being on the board at this time of what is progressive change. I've seen it in the 4 years I've been on the board, and that includes areas of data collection and the cultural dashboard. In this context of this paper, I would like to particularly note the support and the work, the very positive work, the huge amounts of work that's going on in terms of neurodiversity led by ACC Mark Sutherland and Superintendent Graham Galley, and of course members of DACA, the Disability and Carers Staff Association as well, working in this area. And in terms of your comment about prioritisation, I am actually very pleased to see disability specifically mentioned as some of the outcomes here, because that is an area of protected characteristic that often doesn't actually get talked about. So I'm actually pleased that that's come out of all your work. So my first, I do have a question. My first question is really to SPA and Forensics and Police Scotland, which is around the work that's going on in terms of inclusive recruitment, because that's obviously going to have an impact on the workforce in all areas. And do you want the second part of my question? Okay, so the second part of my question was specifically to Police Scotland in terms of specific training for new recruits around the communication, differing communication needs of the people that they're going to come into contact with in the course of their work.
Thanks very much for your question, and I'll take your last question first because I'll remember it. easier. So we're continually refreshing our training programme for new recruits, and looking at the content of that programme. So a big part of that is there's a suite of training that the recruits will now undertake around enabling them to engage with all the variety of needs that would stem from local communities. So we're looking at trauma-informed training. We have a CARES package, which is all about that communication and active engagement with local communities. We've obviously developed and introduced an Act, Don't React programme, which I think lends itself hugely to that. So the training programme, as I see it for recruits, will continue to be a central focus and something that I've enabled the team through the Chief's style of leadership, that we can continually refresh, and so we're doing that. I think the second part of that is about recruitment, where your first question would come, and I'm hugely encouraged by the work that the recruitment team do. We have, in terms of police officer recruitment, a really strong pipeline. We're seeing every year in excess of 4,000 people who would want to join policing. I spoke just in the last fortnight with the most recent intakes of new recruits. 22 different languages were spoken in the room, an enormous and overwhelming range of experience, both in terms of work experience, life experience, a real mix in terms of ethnicity, and for me, 120 people in the room, but it did amplify a huge level of diversity. And our aim isn't just simply to be diverse. Our aim is to attract the very best people inside the organisation. So I think we are attracting the best people who want to join us. But the net effect is that's the range of diversity in the room. So I'm encouraged by that. I think we're developing programmes that support the needs of new recruits really well. However, I think it is also important, and the Chief made this very point at the Federation conference this week, we have a standard, and we won't adjust on that standard. So we've now got to a position where we expect and we will only accept recruits who reach the standard at the end of their training before they go to policing divisions. So I think in the past we've compromised, I guess, a little in terms of that. So we've got a really firm position that fitness, performance, standards, academic achievement needs to be met within your first 13 weeks before we will push those recruits into local policing divisions, and for the vast majority of them, they're demonstrating that standard.
That's helpful, thanks. Okay, Chief Constable, and then I'm going to move on to forensics and SPA corporate.
Thank you. Just be worth highlighting Alan's talk there about the diversity of our recruits, and just reminded me of a really practical use of that. So last time we were here, I talked about the tragic death of the sisters who were part of the triplets from Hungary. The early dialogue with the family, the immediate communication with the family in Hungary was actually done by an officer, one of our officers, who had 3 years service. She works in Aberdeen, and obviously her skills and her ability to speak to the family were drawn upon, really, really positive in terms of us being able to, inform them and give them some support in such tragic circumstances. So there's that very, very practical application. So we're very we value those skills and that diversity across the organisation, and they're very practical, because would have taken, we have access to interpreters, but they're not immediately there, and being able to work with the teams and get the right messaging and to be able to provide the right support. And then when the family came across subsequently, the officer who's young in service met with the family. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move us on. Do you have another question?
No, it was just thank you for that, and just to on the back of what you've just said. Obviously, when you have a very diverse police force, that will be true of all the people you come in contact with. There will always be that capacity, if you like, to engage with people in the community who they may be able to communicate with more directly.
To move us on, and Fiona, could you respond to Katrina's question, please?
Absolutely. Recruitment within into forensic services and improving the diversity within forensic science and within forensic services is a key element of our inclusivity planning work that's currently being finalised. A key strand of that is the introduction of apprenticeships into forensic science, and we're in the final stages of discussing that with trade union colleagues. But I think that is going to make a step change around improving the diversity within forensic science more broadly, because we tend to be recruiting from quite an undiverse group of people primarily. So I'm really excited that the introduction of apprenticeships is going to make a real difference.
And finally,
delighted to hear that.
Finally, Chris.
Thanks, Chair. So very briefly, it's a little different for the SP because we have such small numbers. So we don't do much recruitment, but interestingly, over the last few weeks, we've advertised for a small number of roles. We've actually been inundated with applicants, scores of people from a variety of backgrounds. And we had, similar to Fiona, we did have a modern apprentice vacancy as well, which attracted an awful lot of interest. I can't prove this, but perhaps there is some kind of halo effect from the work that's been done across policing generally that just makes, this policing family seem like a far more attractive and inclusive place to work. So I think we can take a lot of comfort from the fact that there's an awful lot of interest in working for us. Thank you.
So I'm going to move on and ask the members to approve the joint equality outcomes. But before we do that, I'd just like to reflect on something that, Alan, you talked about, the measurement of the outcomes, and sometimes the measurements and the outcomes may not be as we would wish they were. But actually, I think what's incredibly important is the transparency that we're seeing here and the commitment to monitoring and measuring, and that data will be for judgment and improvement, for learning and improvement, not for judgment. So I think it's going to be important as we move through the journey that we recognise that this is about improvement and an overall outcome in the end, rather than necessarily looking for good numbers at the very beginning. So thanks for all the work there. And so therefore, may I ask the members to approve the joint equality outcomes for policing for 2025 to 2029? Good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Now moving on back to you, Chief Constable, with the annual police plan.
Thank you, Chair. Members would present my second annual police plan as Chief Constable, and you're aware that this has been developed and framed and set against the vision and the four elements of the vision and the 3-year business plan. So I hope it provides reassurance in terms of the progress we've made. It aligns with the joint strategy for policing, and it also indicates the direction and deliverables with milestones of improvement for year 2. I'll bring Patrick in a moment. What we've also been able to do is just to be very, very clear of all the commitments that we made. There were a small proportion that haven't been fully achieved in year 1, so they've rolled into the second year. But I'm really encouraged by the progress and the alignment with the vision and the transparency that it provides for both you as the scrutiny body, but also for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And just to add to that, we've seen it was an extremely important point to reflect on the milestones that we're carrying over, but it's also an important part to reflect on the success of the first year as we move in, the launch of body-worn video yesterday, the continued working with partnerships, which is key and a critical dependency of delivering our annual police plan, whether it is with the wider justice system and the rollout of kind of desk and the impact body-worn video will have on that, the continued work with our community partnerships in the NHS is absolutely critical to delivering against the mental health challenge that we have spoke about earlier on. It's about strengthening those community partnerships through the great work that we're doing with COSLA on this, which is really strengthening at the heart of our community policing model as well, but also coming to also reflect on, we did launch our workforce survey. We've made that commitment again to kind of reflect on many of the topics that we've discussed today, and we'll launch that later in the autumn as well. I think the other thing I would just want to kind of highlight is the importance that this has not been done in a silo internally. We are extremely grateful for the feedback provided, not just by yourself, Chair, and authority staff, Amanda and team, really grateful for the support, but also very much wider partners across the public sector who help us shape this, and fed back from government community planning. COSLA has been really, really positive, and we want to continue that work going forward. And that's all I would say by intro. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to open it up to members for questions. Pauline?
Thanks very much, and thanks for the presentation of the plan under those 4 strategic outcomes for the organisation going forward. We spoke earlier on about some of the interdependencies and risks around finance, but what are the other key interdependencies and risks to delivery? And then I've got a very specific couple of other questions. Thanks.
Happy to take that kind of first question. I think the largest interdependency I would point out is just the one that I've said, is about the importance of partnerships. The Chief's annual plan is more than just an annual plan for Police Scotland. It is about wider and whole system kind of change and how we influence that there. So the importance and dependencies of partners is absolutely key, as both the kind of Chief DCC Spears and Mr Eady kind of pointed to earlier on. I think kind of the increased understanding the views and priorities of Scotland's diverse communities is a dependency, because ultimately we are here to serve our communities, ensuring that we are delivering safer communities. So getting feedback through the annual Your Police Matters survey, the independent advisory groups referred, is another key dependency to help us shape and deliver this going forward. I think you also do kind of recognise the element of the importance of the funding kind of aspect, and actually, you know, the growth in the capital settlement really does enable us to try and become a more digitally enabled policing future to organisation to become more efficient and effective has been absolutely key. But there are dependencies there on, is the market able to respond? Are we able to deliver? As we've said earlier on, and I think, you know, the Resources Committee and James already has reflected the areas of risk on that, but there are great plans in place to ensure we deliver that, and that's where the careful planning, coordination, but also flexibility to respond to the unknown, which will happen in year, is absolutely key.
Patrick. The specifics were around one of the objectives under less crime, resourcing function, balancing operational need and staff officer welfare, and I wonder if you could say a bit more about how that's going to be pursued and delivered. And linked to that, 4.19 under a thriving workforce, the approach the service will take to developing a total reward framework.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the question, Pauline. I will take the first one about the processes and policy and resourcing. As has been spoken a number of times here today, you know, welfare, well-being, abstractions, the impact on the front line and strengthening the front line is an absolute priority of the Chief Constable and all of us on that. I'd just like to say thanks, first of all, to the staff that we do have in the resourcing units that we have across Police Scotland. They do a phenomenal job. They are extremely committed, and you will have seen COP26, Unicorn, as well as all of the other events. They are absolutely phenomenal in doing that. But they do need support. It is an area that we can make gains in terms of workforce mix and modernisation that sits in there. There's been a number of audits into that particular area, and we know that we need to bolster it. It is about us being able to focus on the wellbeing of staff around that abstraction, getting consistency across the organisation so that we're sharing the load through the resourcing development that we can do. It's all about our ability also to maintain spontaneous response, and again, the Chief Constable talked about that earlier on today. You need to be able to manage a spontaneous response, but that might be 24, 48 hours ongoing. So being able to have an effective resourcing deployment unit is really key. I think the opportunities that we've got, we've talked about the workforce modernisation is there. the force modernisation in terms of where people are working weekends, so we spread the load. So there's a number of different factors at the moment that are making us more efficient in the way we use our staff. We focus on wellbeing and we do resourcing. But it is a particular area that we are going to focus on over the next year and take the audit recommendations into place as well. So thank you.
In part of your question, I think Pauline, which was around the reward package, and I think, you know, it's vitally important that in 2025, 2026 and going forward that we have got a reward package that's fit for purpose, and often our reward packages focus, or the focus often can be on annual pay, but we recognise that police officers and staff do an incredibly difficult job, so we have to look at the provisions around that. So I know later in the day we'll go into a little bit more detail around that, but we have been in active discussion with both staff associations, trade unions and the broader diversity staff associations about what a total reward package would look like, and we've said on a number of occasions quite publicly about our commitment to ensure that it is fit for purpose. So we are looking at a whole raft of different measures that will help us add value. We recognise that our officers and staff have got huge responsibilities around caring, just as one example, and it's how do we ensure that our package is fit for purpose. So I'll say more about that later in the day, but there is an absolute commitment, and the Chief again has been really, really clear that we need to drive progress in that space.
Thank you very much. Grant, do you have an interest in this?
Thanks, Chair. I'm very supportive of the plan. In reading it, I noticed that a number of items are headed up, improve different things. So my question is really, are you confident you've got all the base data necessary in disaggregated form to be able to measure how you're delivering the improvements right through to 2030? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. As always, very thoughtful question. So the Refresh Performance and Accountability Framework is going to be presented to the SPA Police and Performance Committee in June. We have aligned it to the vision and the different priorities, as everybody knows, and you will hear that constantly as we go through, because this is about how do we deliver, how do we best use our resources, how do we have an accountability framework that holds us to account, both locally and organisationally, by our communities in particular. So yes, we do have baselines, we have management information and key performance indicators for most of our areas. There's a couple of new measures that have been facilitated by our single crime recording system. So repeat offenders, repeat victims, we are now able to track some of that. So that will be new baselines that we will not have had before. So yes, we're confident that we will have all of the baselines that we need as we go forward, but there are new ones that we now have capability to be able to do. And again, that links to the threat, harm and risk, because those are repeat offenders. That's where we see the threat, harm and risk. We talked about it in acquisitive crime. And then repeat victimisation, our vision and our focus on supported victims, that enables us to look as that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great, because I know that handling that vast amount of data is quite a challenge in itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think we've actually, I think, talked about quite a lot that's come up in this annual police plan throughout our meeting. So you presented it, Chief Constable, here for discussion, and that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Now, that's concluding our business taken in public, but before the close of the meeting, I need to highlight, as we've already referenced throughout the meeting, that Grant McCrae, Caroline Stewart, Katrina Stewart's last board meeting as members, with Grant and Caroline having been with us for 8 years and Katrina for 4. And I'm confident I speak for absolutely all of us about your contributions been invaluable. I think Grant, in terms of your chairing of Resources Committee, has helped steer and navigate, negotiate the financial challenges. And I think we're in a better position in the policing budget as a consequence of your input. Caroline, your support and challenge to drive transformation and improvements has made significant improvements to the reform agenda in policing. And Katrina, your laser focus in ensuring progress on equalities and agenda has absolutely supported and challenged in equal measure, I think, not only the delivery colleagues in Police Scotland, but your board members as well. So on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank each of you for your dedication and commitment to policing. You do leave policing in a stronger position than when you joined, and we send you all our very best wishes for your future. Thank you. Chief Constable.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd just like to add to that. You've brought a lot of skill and wisdom to the collective group, and at times some of your questions have been slightly uncomfortable for us, but that's absolutely right and proper. And bringing the skill that you have from the various backgrounds and the interests you have has kept us on our toes. I was going to say, Grant, keep a track on our spend on the capital on the capital budget, and just check whether your wise words and your direction, whether we've listened and whether we've achieved that. But thank you. Been a real honour and a pleasure working with you, and really appreciate what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. That brings us to the end.